Alright, I gave you an option to set up a domain controller, Windows 2008, and attach it to Windows 7. So that was just an optional thing. If you didn't do it, you can just watch. And you are going to run into a lot of domains, so it is worth knowing how to do this sort of stuff. Getting domain admin is generally a goal. So I use a tool called SMB exec, which I showed you how to install in the setup instructions. So start SMB exec. And go to 1 system enumeration, and then we can do 7 remote login validation. So I'm just going to give it Windows 7, which I'm not entirely sure what Windows 7's IP address is. 75. Alright, so you can give it a long list, of course. I mentioned previously if you've got like one local admin, you can send it probably to a lot of other systems in the network, so I'll just give it a list here, a file, and username. I'm going to do Georgia2, so just some non-domain admin user from the domain. You can give it a hash, so we can do that past the hash, as well as if we did like Mimikatz or something, we could have plain text as well. It's also a tool called Responder you can use. I didn't show it in this class to listen. Well, Responder's not going to work with this unless it's plain text because it's going to be net NTLM. But, I mean, there are different ways to get password hashes besides what we've looked at in this class. As you continue your pen testing education, you'll run into different tools and techniques that you may like. But Georgia 2's password, I think, is bulbsec1. And the domain is going to be bulbsec. So Georgia 2 is not a domain admin, but she is able to log in. So do you want to look for domain enterprise processes? So this is going to look for logged in administrators. So it looks like it worked. Remote access is identified. So we will be able to log in. However, if I come back over to Win 7 and I switch users, and tell it I want bulbsec and administrator, and whatever you set your password to for your domain admin, log in. Now if I do this again, now that a domain admin is logged in, just do the same stuff and say yes. And it did find administrator logged in. So now we can go back to main menu, choose obtain hashes, and so since we know the domain admin is logged in, we should be able to get the domain admin's not just hash, but hopefully plain text passwords. So I want workstation and server hashes, can give it that same credentials. I'm not entirely sure Georgia 2 has enough privileges, but we'll see. Yeah, it worked. So local hashes, 4 cached hashes, so the last 4 domain users. So those will be an MS cache format. We can do that with Metasploit as well. We can ask it for its MS cache. Generally tell my clients to either turn that off or keep the number that it saves as low as possible. It does by default save 10 of the last users who logged in. There probably aren't 10 domain users. And it also says it has 3 passwords in memory, so logged in users. Awesome. And it says those are located at log, SMB exec, and hashes. So I'll go back to main menu and exit. So I'm going to go to log, hashes, and cat all hashes by host. So we've got our local hashes just from a hash dump. We've got some cached ones. Again, these are going to be MS cache format. So your hash crackers will know how to deal with them. You'll just have to give them, like with a hashcat, you have to do the -m. And for memory, we were able to get bulb pass 123 and like my local one, and then Georgia 2. But Georgia 2 is not a domain admin. So from there we can like feed this into psexec and become a local admin, or if we had a session on there, we could do our incognito. Like sessions-i6, and if we do load incognito and list tokens-u. Oh, we're currently not system. We'd have to go through all that bypass UAC stuff, but we could become the, well, I'll do it, why not? Use exploit local, or Windows local bypass UAC, set session 6, exploit. It's probably still not going to work because I already uploaded it once, which is really silly, and somebody should fix it. No, for whatever reason, it's not overriding it. So, alright, let's just use psexec then. Use. So we'll kind of do the same thing. I mean, it would make more sense to do it like that, but whatever. Exploit Windows, SMB, psexec. It's always good to have more than one way to do things. As you've noticed from watching we bumble around through this class and make things fail all the time and then fix them. So if we show our options and I set SMB user to administrator and SMB pass to bulb pass 123 and SMB domain to bulbsec, and set our host to this. So now we are domain admin. We are still on the Windows 7 box. We could have done this on the domain controller as well. And then we could do, what I typically like to do is, if you want to create a new domain admin, which you certainly don't have to at this point since we have domain admin credentials, but if you would use the token just as another way, like if the domain admin token is on there, another thing you could do is impersonate the token and then add a user, so net user, Georgia 3, pass, bulb, 123, add, domain, access is denied, but I'm logged in as the domain, oh, I'm system, right, exit, right, because that made me system. I thought psexec would do it, but it's like, no, I actually need to be the domain admin. So I really need to be able to bypass UAC and then do incognito. Oh, but I'm system now, duh. Alright, so load incognito. And list tokens dash u, impersonate token bulb sec administrator, get UID, and then if I dropped into a shell, I could do, again, if you already have the password, which we do, this isn't necessary, or even the hash for pass the hash, you could pass the hash into the domain controller. But you do have the option now that you are domain admin, or if you did it through something like this and you didn't do your SMB exec, you instead just found the token, you could add a new one. So net user, Georgia 3, pass, bulb, 123, add, domain, and then net groups, domain admins, Georgia 3, add domain. So then Georgia 3 is now a domain admin as well. So you just need the privileges of a domain administrator, and you can, if you like, create a new one. So I'm not entirely sure what the... It's 76. It's on both networks originally. I was going to pivot to it, but that's a bit much, really. Exit. Let's just go back into SMB exec. And do obtain hashes from the domain controller. 76, and username is administrator. Password is bulb pass123. Domain is bulbsec. And I see this a lot, that people actually move the... Oh, well, that one we can just leave. But they'll actually move stuff around. So this one right here is what changes the ntds.dit. They'll actually move it to other drives. You could honestly just like keep trying different drives if you want to be lazy about it. You could also probably psexec to it and find it. So this will actually pull the domain passwords, well, password hashes. So this will give you more hashes to potentially crack if you're doing any like password strength testing. This would be the way you would get them. So we can get all the password hashes for our domain. And of course, we actually now have domain administrator access, so we can, if they have remote desktop, they can certainly log into the domain controller. We can psexec into the domain controller. At this point, we have access to every system in the domain as administrator. So, I mean, I typically, like in classes like this, don't show it because it's really hard to set up the domain controller. Well, not really hard, but it's hard to hand out domain controllers, I guess. I hand out virtual machines, so if I'm on site and can bring like my Mac Mini that has capture the flag network on it, then we can do it. But just like online classes, it's really difficult to hand out domain controllers because you never know what IP addresses they have to have, and they have to be set to static. So a lot of times people miss this in online classes, so you got to see it. So if you did set up your domain controller, you can get a feel for how to do the domain stuff, which is definitely going to be relevant. Most people are going to have domains.